In this video, I will discuss elements of poetry. These are going to be some of the literary terms you will use while analyzing poetry. And some of these may seem familiar from previous assignments in the course, but I want to talk about how they apply to the poetry you'll be reading. This goes along with the chapter Elements of Poetry in the textbook. The first thing to think about when discussing a poem is the voice, which we can normally determine through the speaker and the tone. And the speaker is the person telling the poem, and so it's just like the narrator in a short story. The big thing is to not confuse the speaker of the poem with the author. They are not always the same. For example, in Robert Browning's My Last Duchess, the speaker of the poem is a duke who may or may not have killed his wife. We can presume that is not Robert Browning. Along the same lines, tone is the implied attitude towards the subject. This is often revealed through diction, which you should remember from earlier in the semester is the word choice. Now, what you need to think about in poetry with diction is both the denotation and the connotation of words. So the denotation is the literal or primary meaning of a word. The connotation is the associations people make with words that go beyond the literal meaning. For example, if you say someone has yellow hair, the denotation, we just think of the color yellow. But with the connotation, when we hear yellow hair, we don't picture golden, beautiful locks. We picture more of a flat tone. There are lots of other examples in your textbook, and you can definitely let me know if you have further questions. But denotation and connotation work together when you're looking at diction. Now, there are some figures of speech that are going to come into play. The first one is hyperbole, which is exaggeration for effect. So this is something where you say, oh, I have a million things to do today. You probably don't have a million things to do, but it shows that you have quite a few things to do. That's how hyperbole works. Now, the next two can be a little confusing. Metonymy is a figure of speech in which the name of one thing is used to refer to another thing associated with it. When we say, the White House has promised to veto the bill, for example, we use the White House as a metonym for the president and his administration. Then there's synecdoche, and synecdoche is a special type of metonymy. Synecdoche is a type of metonymy in which the part is used to name or stand in for the whole, as when we refer to manual laborers as hands, so saying, all hands on deck, we're using synecdoche. We're referring to the people, but just talking about the hands. Or, I got new wheels, you don't mean you got new wheels, you mean you got a car. So synecdoche is the part for the whole. Another good example is like, for metonymy is loyalty to the crown. You mean really to the queen who wears the crown or king that wears the crown. Or I pledge allegiance to the flag. The flag is standing in for America. Those are all metonyms. And so just keep that in mind. Synecdoche is part for the whole. Metonym is something standing in for something associated with it. Now, personification is treating something non-human, such as an abstraction, as if it were a person by endowing it with human-like qualities. So, as in, death entered the room. Death is not physically capable of entering the room. Or people say, the hyena laughed at the joke. Well, the hyena is not actually laughing at the joke, right? So you can personify objects. You can personify people, which normally involves some anthropomorphism. You can personify abstractions such as death or love. Love looks not with the eyes. Well, love doesn't look at all, right? But that's the way we think of it. Metaphor, which we've discussed a little bit previously, is a figure of speech in which two unlike things are compared implicitly, without the use of like or as in love is a rose. So in this case, rather than directly saying love is like a rose, we just say it is that, which implies the comparison. A simile, on the other hand, is a direct, explicit comparison of one thing to another, again, to similar things, usually using words like or as to draw the connection. As in, my love is like a red, red rose. So you see the difference there. I often use this, her fiery hair is a metaphor, or her hair shone like fire is a simile. Now, this last one is one that isn't always in a textbook, but it's something that's important, and it's apostrophe. And while you're probably thinking of the symbol that you use in punctuation, when we talk about the literary term apostrophe, we mean addressing something that cannot respond. Oh, wonderful computer that sits on this table, would that you could tell me the answers. That's an apostrophe. it can be to anything that cannot respond. So it can be to a dead person, it can be to an object, it can be just to someone who is not present, it can be to, the gods and goddesses in old poetry. Anything that where you're addressing something that cannot respond is an apostrophe. Okay, some other literary terms that might come into play. We've got allegory, which is in a literary work, whether in verse or prose. So it can be a poem or a short story or a novel, in which characters, action, and even aspects of setting signify or serve as symbols for a second correlated order of concepts, persons, and actions. So there's a whole mapping of what happens in the story onto something else. So it's a representation of something else through a different tale. Alliteration is the repetition of usually initial consonant sounds through a sequence of words. For example, while I nodded, nearly napping, in Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. So you see the nodded, nearly napping. Those are the alliterative words. Allusion is a reference to a literary work to a person, place, thing in history, or another work of literature. So if you are making a reference to a historical event, that would be an allusion. But if you say he was as depressed as Hamlet, that's a literary allusion, right? We're comparing back to Shakespeare's Hamlet. So these are connections. This is what makes something metatextual. It's connecting that work to other works or other events or people or things. Assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds in a sequence of words with different endings. For example, the death of the poet was kept from his poems. The poet and poems. So it's almost like an internal rhyme within the words. Symbolism, which we've talked about a little before, is a person, place, thing, or event that figuratively represents or stands for something else. Often one thing or idea represented is more abstract in general, and the symbol is more concrete in particular, such as the rocking horse standing in for luck in the Rocking Horse Winner. Syntax is word order. It's the idea that just the way the words are put together to form phrases, clauses, and sentences. This is going to be very important with poetry because frequently they're going to change the word order because they want to keep a certain meter, or to have the rhyme at the end of the line. They're going to change word order. So you will probably talk about syntax while discussing poetry. Now let's talk about rhyme. The most common type of rhyme, which you're probably familiar with, is end rhyme. And it occurs when the last words or in two or more lines of poetry rhyme with each other. So, I had a cat, he wore a hat. That's end rhyme. Right? Cat and hat being each the end of a line and rhyming with another. Internal rhyme occurs when a word in a line of poetry rhymes with another word in the same or adjacent lines. So, the dew drew, quivering and chill. So dew and drew rhyme with each other. So if the sentence was the cat's hats, then that would be internal rhyme. It doesn't have to be in that one line. It can be that line or the second line. Notice that this is different from assonance because it's got the same end sound. So with assonance, the end sound's not the same, but the vowel sounds are. An I rhyme, or sight rhyme, involves words that don't actually rhyme, but look like they do because of similar spelling. Cough and bow are good examples here. So it's rhyme when we look at it. A good one that comes from Shakespeare is love and prove. Right? Love and prove do not rhyme when you say them out loud. When you look at them, they have I rhyme. We also have off, half, near, or slant rhyme. These all mean the same thing. And it's just a rhyme that's slightly off or only approximate. Usually because the word's final consonant sounds correspond, but not the vowels that precede them. So here's phases and houses. All I've got is that as. So it's not really a good rhyme, but we could call it slant rhyme is probably the most common term for that. Now these are some things about poetic structure. A caesura is a short pause within a line of poetry. It's often, but not always, signaled by punctuation. Note there are two caesuras in this line from the Poe's The Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary. So the commas here signal these pauses, and they are both caesuras. Now frequently, when you have a caesura in a line of poetry, the line will then go on and be enjambed. Enjambment is when one line of poetry runs over onto the next without a stop, as in the following lines from William Wordsworth. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. This slash indicates that there's a line break, but notice there's no other punctuation between these two lines. The line spills over onto the next line. The lines themselves would then be described as enjambed. Now, every line of poetry is either enjambed or end-stopped. End-stopped poetry is a line of verse that contains or concludes a complete clause and usually ends with a punctuation mark. So you're watching for either enjambment or end-stop at the end of every poetic line. Now, a foot is the basic unit of poetic meter. It consists of any of various fixed patterns of 1 to 3 stressed or unstressed syllables. You're going to learn more about this in the video about meter, but I just wanted to be clear. A foot may contain more than one word or just one syllable of a multisyllabic word. In scansion, breaks between feet are usually indicated with a vertical line or slash mark. So you see how the feet are marked here. And as I said, you'll learn more about that in the video on meter. But I wanted to go over a few different types of meter. Iambic meter refers to a metrical form in which each foot consists of an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed one. This type of foot is an iamb, and so that's why it's called iambic. The most common poetic meter in English is iambic pentameter, a metrical form in which most lines consist of 5 iambs. So, one common note on either lyre did strike. And that's from Dryden's. Then they've got trochaic meter, which refers to a metrical form where it's a trochee, and that consists of a stressed syllable followed by an unstressed. So you can think iambic and trochee, sort of trochaic, sort of flip. An anapest has 2 unstressed syllables followed by a stressed one. Didactic has a stressed syllable followed by 2 unstressed, so those sort of flip each other. Spondy has a pair of stressed syllables. Pyrrhic has a meter with 2 unstressed syllables. And you really just have to look at the whole line by itself to determine whether it's spondy or, to determine when it's pyrrhic or didactylic or anapestic. Now, I'm not going to test you on whether or not you get the meter right. But for some of the poems, talking about meter is important to analyzing the poems. So I want to give you all the information you could possibly need to discuss the rhyme and meter of these works. I do expect you to notice rhyme schemes. Now, there are some set poetic forms that we should talk about. A closed form is one where it has a set standard. The most famous of this would be the sonnet. It's a fixed verse form consisting of 14 lines, usually in iambic pentameter. A Shakespearean sonnet has 3 quatrains, which are 4-line units, and a couplet. And it goes A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. Now, these letters can change. So the ones that say A rhyme with each other, B rhyme with each other, C, and so on. So notice it's 3 sets of 4 and then 1 couplet. And a couplet is just where 2 lines rhyme with each other. And now an Italian sonnet consists of 8 rhyme-length lines, which is an octave, plus 6 rhyme-length lines, a sestet. And it's often either A, B, B, A, B, B, A, C, D, E, C, D, E, or A, B, B, A, C, D, D, C, D, E, F, D, E, F. So notice we've got these 8 lines and then 6 lines. This sonnet is also called the Petrarchan sonnet in honor of the Italian poet Petrarch. Now, you'll notice the Shakespearean sonnet is often also called the English sonnet. So both of these have 2 sets of names. And you'll see examples of these when we read sonnets in the text, but I wanted you to see how it worked. Now, a couplet, as I said, is a pair of lines that rhyme. The most popular of the couplets is the heroic couplet, which is 2 rhymes of 2 rhyming lines of iambic pentameter. And there's usually a caesura in the middle of each line. Quatrain is a 4-line unit of verse, whether an entire poem or stanza or a group of 4 lines. Then we got sestet, which is the 6 lines, and an octave, which is 8 lines. All right, so couplet 2, quatrain is 4, then 6, then 8. Now there's also open or free-form poems, and we normally will describe these as either being in blank verse or free verse. Blank verse is iambic pentameter that does not rhyme. Okay, so it's got that da 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 da, but it does not rhyme. Free verse can have any line length, any meter, and there's no set rhyme or meter for the work overall. So that's all for these. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing what you do with the scavenger hunt to find literary terms in our